Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week, I sit down with a different industry thought leader to discuss the latest cybersecurity trends and how these trends are affecting the work of Infosec professionals, as well as tips for those trying to break in or move up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. Our guest today, John Torres, is the president of Guidepost Solutions Security and Technology Consulting Practice. He works on matters related to risk mitigation, anti-money laundering, security assessments, due diligence, investigations, crisis management planning, cross-border security, event security management, federal counseling, and government compliance. Prior to joining Guidepost Solutions, he served as the special agent in charge for Homeland Security, the second largest investigative agency in the federal government, and prior to that as acting director for the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. He is frequently asked to comment on data security breaches and compliance issues, which is one of the many things we wanted to discuss with him today. So, John, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Lovely day. So, how far back to start things off? How far back does your interest in computers and tech and security go? Was that something you were always interested in, or is that something that came later in life?
Actually, I found myself early in my career when I was a young federal agent in Los Angeles, trying to find ways to obtain better evidence, more credible evidence. So early in my career, I worked a lot of cases in Los Angeles that were related to counterfeiting, smuggling, trafficking, you name it. But many of those investigations, many of those were undercover also. They relied heavily on eyewitness testimony, material witness testimony, and of course some physical evidence. But depending on the type of case it was, for example, it was human trafficking, you really, the evidence were the people.
Right.
And so those cases can be very frustrating to prosecute because people's memories fade over time, or the recollection is not that good, or their credibility can be challenged in court. And so sometimes those cases were a nightmare to prove in court. And so I found myself working with a team of agents saying, how can we get better evidence? And we really started to focus in on technology back then. Computer evidence, different types of camera, surreptitious recordings, whether they were audio or video. And really, at that point, when you could bring those cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute, what you're looking at is the video of the crime taking place, or an audio recording of a suspect trying to make a deal, and then you can incorporate that with fingerprints or follow the financial trail, and you end up having a pretty locked down case that usually did not end up going to trial. And so very early in my career, I was always looking at technology to see how we could move things along further. And in fact, at one point, I was asked to stand up what's called the Law Enforcement Support Center, which today is really the nerve center for Homeland Security with all law enforcement agencies across the country. And at the time we started it, it was a small little pilot program in Burlington, Vermont, with about 8 people. Today, it's a 60,000 square foot office that has hundreds of people working in it 24 hours a day, and all law enforcement agencies can connect to DHS through that center now.
Wow. Was your, so it sounds like you were kind of spearheading the increase in use of like technology for, information data collecting. Was this met with resistance from your supervisors, or did they understand the importance of it pretty much right away?
Well, that's funny you bring that up. My original supervisor, when I said I wanted to use more technology, at the very early stage of my career, he says, "No, this is how we do it. We've always done things this way. Just go out there and make the case." And I remember one time we worked a case for about a month, did a number of undercover deals, long surveillance hours overnight, and then ultimately, because we didn't have all this technology, we weren't allowed to use it at the time. When we went to do the search warrants, they had moved out in the middle of the night, and we ended up with nothing.
Wow. And
at that point, I sat there in my boss's office. He says, "You know what? Let's try it your way next time and see how this goes." And it really changed everything in that office going forward.
Yeah. Sometimes, all right, it's time to go with Plan B, and then turns out Plan B turns into Plan A. So
we kind of had to learn the hard way on that one.
Yeah. So while you've clearly had numerous jobs and responsibilities, and worn a lot of hats over the years, the area of your expertise that we're specifically interested in today at the Cyberwork podcast is your work preventing and repairing damage caused by security breaches. So I thought we could start there if possible. What are some specific cases, issues, or attack vectors that you and Guidepost have been focusing on lately with regard to security breach?
Well, I can tell you some of the industries that have been calling quite frequently for us is the The education sector, really, we get a lot of schools and universities calling not just for cyber breaches and cybersecurity, but for all things security design work, training for active shooter. It has really been something that has been at the forefront of our mission and our services that we provide to clients probably for the past 2 years now.
Okay.
And it seems like I read a statistic most recently that said there have been over 650 shootings in schools since September. That's basically 650 shootings this past school year.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we start to work on one for another university, you see something in the news. It seems like every week. And so last month's shootings are old news already.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing a lot in the education sector, a lot in the healthcare sector.
Mm-hmm.
We see some disgruntled patients that may be violent towards doctors, where they feel they received poor health care or poor health care for a loved one. And then we have the HIPAA issues trying to protect the client information, and with the electronic records of the doctors that you're using now. It's very convenient to go online, see all your medical records, and access them almost in real time. But that comes with a lot of security issues, as you can imagine, because that's very sensitive information that resides in someone's cloud somewhere. And then, of course, we still do a lot of work in the financial sector,
Mm-hmm.
banks, financial industries, anti-money laundering, compliance, a lot of software, there's a lot of data, as well as financial transactions that take place on a daily basis. And we're seeing a lot more now in the sports and entertainment industry, whether it's through movie studios or actual leagues or stadiums and arenas that want to have better protection, because you're starting to see a lot more of the Internet of Things, where historically things weren't as connected as they are today.
Yes, for sure. Now, do you see any particular through lines between the different ways that security is being breached, especially sort of online and electronically, between these industries? Are people using sort of the same techniques to get into healthcare that they are to get into finance sectors and so forth?
Sure. We see a lot of phishing, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but you see a lot of the similar techniques where they just try to get people to click on something they shouldn't, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with the healthcare industry, you see a lot of it in Florida, where you have many retired people.
Mm-hmm.
They're more susceptible to clicking on a link because they're not, it's a generational thing about being taught and using computers and emails and what to click on and what not to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy for them to think, well, this is coming from my doctor. I should just click on this link, and there goes all their information.
Yeah. Now, with regard to specifically healthcare, and I guess also with schools and so forth, you sort of combined security breaches with regards to electronic breaches, i.e. theft of data, with also actual, perimeter breaches, active shooters and so forth. Are those combinations a common sort of caseload for you? And how do you sort of combine electronic safety with physical safety?
So initially, they were not.
Okay.
A lot of requests to just come in and do training, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or do security design work, change the layout of how when someone enters a lobby, what they can actually gain access to, or make stronger doors so people can get into the school or doctor's office. But that then transitioned over to, can you come in here and do a full assessment? Because really, if we went in and did the training, and we did it for a number of employees, for example, if it was teachers or bankers or lawyers, you had executive training versus rank and file training.
Okay.
And more times than not, the rank and file, the average employee would say, hey, this is all great that you're teaching us how to respond in an active shooter situation, but what is the company doing for everything else? How are they making us safer? Because someone could just walk in the front door. It's always open, and there's no locks. There's no cameras.
Right.
And so we found a number of clients that, can you come in and do an assessment and look at everything, including potential cyber breaches? And so what we end up doing now is more of a comprehensive look, sort of a security master plan, to address all things And then we can then phase it for them and say, here's a menu of options, and you could build it out over a time frame based on what they think is the highest risk that's in front of them today.
Okay, so that seems like that's kind of the way of the future here. That we're thinking in terms of not just electronic, but sort of a comprehensive plan for every aspect of your organization.
Right.
Yeah. Now, as mentioned at the top of the show, we're talking about a lot of different things today, but the focus of CyberWork is to talk about careers in the cybersecurity industry. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about the career path you took to become a security consultant the way you are. What are some of the intermediate steps along the way in terms of important skills you needed to learn, titles you needed to earn, information absorbed that got you into this position in your career?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And one of the things I tell, especially college students or young professionals,
Mm-hmm.
please learn how to write. It's
Yes.
critical. In any profession, to be quite frank with you, whether you were starting out as a federal agent as I did and worked a number of different types of investigations or security events throughout my career. And so quite frankly, that was able to translate into a career for me in security. But I always start with saying, you got to learn how to write. If you can write, there's a lot of report writing in our world, whether you're presenting a prosecution report to a U.S. attorney's office, or in our world today, doing a security assessment, putting a report together for a client. They pay a lot of money, and they expect a certain level of professionalism, and
Yep.
they don't want to see something scribbled together on half a page here.
Right.
That's part one. But part two is there's a lot of training people can do and a lot of certifications that they can get. And so in our world at Guidepost Solutions, for example, we have a number of security specialists that have backgrounds in engineering and architecture or IT in security, for example. And that's because we do a lot of security design work as opposed to the boots on the ground that you hear about with the guards in uniform standing post, for example. We'll go in and design security systems for an NFL stadium or NBA arena or university or a high rise, like what used to be called the Sears Tower,
Yep.
for example. Now Willis Tower,
corner from my office here.
right.
Yeah.
So today it's Willis Tower.
Yep.
We have a lot of design specialists, and they have all kinds of certifications from a certified protection specialist, or even a certified cloud security professional. We even have some people that are LEED, leadership in energy and efficiency design.
Okay.
Or payment card industry PCI specialists, or computer security incident response teams. All of those are a service that we can provide that are critical to many of our clients because they really want to incorporate all those different facets of security when they're looking at what the risks are for their company or for themselves.
Okay. I think, possibly people who are not currently working in cybersecurity but are interested in transitioning toward it, probably their ears perked up a little when you said that you have, IT people and architects and so forth. So when you were hiring people who have these I wouldn't say non-traditional, but you wouldn't maybe pull them first out of the resume pile. Like, what was it that you saw in your, people who had IT and, security architect background or, IT architect background that you thought would make them capable of doing this job? Were there certain things that they needed to show, or were you able to sort of like transition them more towards a security framework?
Yeah. So there's been two parts to that, and the best of both worlds. People will have both of these, but we have some people that can do great design work. That they'll pull out the specs. They can do it through some of the software that's available now. We basically have services that a managed services division out of our Dallas office, and also a support division that will sit there and do a lot of that design for all of our offices. But that doesn't necessarily translate into being able to communicate with people very well.
Yep.
And so we have some people that are great communicators / salespeople, but they don't have the technical background. And in our world, what we see is people that can do both, that have a technical background, that can actually do the physical security assessments or the computer IT type of assessment for the architecture of the system. And then also be able to get in a boardroom or C-suite and communicate that to the clients very efficiently. That's not always the case. That doesn't necessarily mean we still don't want to hire you,
Right.
because we still need people that can actually do that. They can work in their office or sit in a cubicle and really roll up their sleeves and get that work done.
Yep.
But the people that are succeeding the most in our company are the people who can do both.
Okay. So can you sort of walk me through your average day at Guidepost? What are some jobs, tasks, responsibilities that are constant on most days? Like, what time do you get into work? What do you start with? What's the coffee come in?
The one thing that I like about my job is it varies every single day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the consistency. It's not a 9-to-5 job.
Okay.
One of the things people ask me about is, do you have to go in the office every day? I said, no, not necessarily. In fact, I travel a lot. We have offices around the globe. And so I'm either traveling to meet with our offices or clients, for example. And we have a number of clients across the country and globally as well. So when I'm not traveling, if I am in the office, for example, I'll try to get in real early before traffic, or I'll wait, let it die down a little bit for the commute purposes and get in a little later. But then I end up being, my daughter asked me this the other day. What do you do, Dad? I said, besides talk on the phone and sit in meetings all day. And she looked at me and said, that sounds kind of boring. And so I had to explain it to her a little more and talk about how we try to solve people's problems.
Yep.
And so my typical day is responding to client needs, client emergencies, which happen more often than not, taking calls at 2:00 in the morning from our office in Singapore, or early in the morning from our UK offices, and now we've just expanded into Latin America, South America, and I'll be heading down to Colombia here in another couple of weeks. So there's a lot going on, and I'm usually out of the office working with clients or meeting with employees from our different offices.
Okay. What is the most challenging, if you can think of it, most challenging cybersecurity breach or case you ever worked on, and what did you do to turn it into a successful outcome?
Yeah, that's there's been a number of them, but I'll mention one here that we did a couple of years ago that involved a financial institution where an executive at that financial institution received a package in the mail that had a number of customer data sheets, basically, the personal data and financial data of a number of the financial institution's clients.
Okay.
It was sent to them, including the data of himself and his, a close relative of his. And they said, here's an example of the data that's being breached from your institution, and here's the name of the person that is stealing it from you and selling it out on the open market. So he immediately called the FBI. FBI came in, took a look at it, and said, this doesn't really rise to a level of a federal investigation. You'll have to handle this yourself as part of an internal investigation. And so they turned around and hired us. They asked us to come in on a holiday weekend when the bank was closed and go through as much of the background data as we could. And so we brought in our IT and cyber professionals. We did a cyber forensic investigation, as well as interviewed witnesses that were listed on this letter. And ultimately what we found out is that person who had been temporarily suspended pending the investigation was not involved at all. She was being falsely accused by another employee who was jealous of her promotion.
Wow.
And really what ultimately allowed this person to get access to all this information is this financial institution did not really have the good checks and balances in place. They weren't using technology like cameras. They weren't using notification systems with their software. Mm-hmm. So basically, any employee could access anyone's information and not leave a trail, or it wouldn't trigger any alerts. And on top of that, they could then go copy all that information on their copiers, and there was no cameras in common places, so they could see what was going on after hours. They didn't have any access control monitoring, so you could see who was coming in and out at odd hours. So there were a number of things that they had to improve ultimately. And so what made us successful is really having our our computer forensic people go through the digital trail, and we were able to determine the only 3 people had accessed the majority of those records, and 2 of them we were able to rule out as being involved, and it really left with the one person that ultimately the bank had to let go.
So that's another example of like you said, you're not just working with either just the technical side of security compliance, but also the physical side. Like you're suggesting cameras and locks and so forth.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And different types of compliance control issues,
Mm-hmm.
policies that needed to be followed. And so they're in a much better place today. That couldn't happen again. But similar with many clients, they don't think it's ever going to happen to them until it does, and then it ends up costing them a lot more money to get it fixed.
Yeah, then they have to call Guidepost. So you already mentioned specifically 2 a.m., but my next question was about what are, if any, are some downsides to the kind of work you do? Since your job is kind of a dream job for a lot of security folks, what are some of the, as I put it, it's 2 a.m. and I'm still up dealing with this nonsense aspect of the work that they should know about as well?
Yeah, I do get a lot of that. But that comes with the territory, so that's to be expected somewhat. It doesn't happen as often as it did as when I was in the federal government. It happened at least once or twice a night back then. Some of the issues I see is you can get some very demanding clients with unrealistic expectations.
Okay.
We've had some clients that for the amount of money that some of them pay, they just assume, for what I'm paying you, this should be fixed tomorrow.
Right.
Or you get clients that they really don't want to spend the money on security or compliance until they have to. And then, of course, by then it's too late. And it becomes you can pay me now, or you can pay me a much higher premium later, because we're going to have to drop everything and scramble an entire team as opposed to 1 or 2 people up front that could put together a comprehensive security plan for you. So that can be frustrating, but I understand it. Security and compliance does not generate revenue for many companies. It's a cost, and so they try to keep their costs down as much as they can.
Mm-hmm. So while it's impossible to know everything about cybersecurity and also still do your day-to-day responsibilities, your clients obviously depend on you for this. They need you to be able to assess risk and advise and mitigation, often on challenges that are evolving minute by minute. So how do you address this challenge? Obviously, I'm assuming you have sort of advisors and who are keeping up to date with all the security, changes minute by minute. What does your team look like in that regard?
We do have teams that are continually taking training and going through the most recent generations of software and technical equipment, so we can stay on top of that. Really what I see is, how do you address that evolving challenge? One of the best ways to do that is by having a security master plan, as opposed to trying to put Band-Aids on different types of areas. We had one client recently approach us and say they wanted to build a smart center, not just an operations center, not a security center, not a global security operations center, but a smart center that is really going to control everything for them.
Mm-hmm.
It can turn on and off the lights. It could unlock doors. It could handle the thermostat temperature in different buildings. And so really you end up saving money that over the long term, it could pay for itself. But really the genesis of it is security. And so while some companies don't want to invest that kind of money, and we understand it, we also provide solutions where people can do managed services, and we can basically chase the sun for them, depending on where they have their offices, whether it's here, West Coast, India, Asia, and we'll work it overnight for them out of our operations center, similar to a help desk that's located somewhere. And what we do is put protocols in place that say, if this event happens or this alarm goes off, how do you want us to respond? Do you want us to call a particular person? Do you want us to just call the security company on the ground? And so really it becomes a much more efficient process, so you stay on top of the trends and things that are happening in real time.
So from a security and technology standpoint, what's the most important yet overlooked thing that you think that enterprises don't do to protect their data? Are there any examples of strategies that used to be a problem, conversely, that most companies seem to have figured out by now? So I guess that's sort of 2 questions there. Like, what's the thing that you wish more companies were systematically doing? And then are there any things that people are starting to systematically do that's reducing certain types of breaches?
Yeah, we're doing a lot more data center security design, which
Okay.
goes in hand with cloud data protection. That people need, that they're getting much better. As recently as 2 or 3 years ago, people were saying, "What's the cloud? What are you talking about?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And today, they're being very aggressive in protecting a lot of data. And out here in Northern Virginia, where I live, there's data centers popping up left and right that are going in with the state of the art design protections that didn't exist a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
But one of the things I see the companies are figuring that out. They're also figuring out the simple things like complex password policies that didn't exist. That they're kind of a pain to all of us that are the users. I have to change my password again. It's only been 90 days, and
Yeah.
I use the last 8 that I use, and it's got to include all 15 characters and
Right.
etc. But they're getting better at that and added in two-factor authentication also. So
Mhm.
those are some of the things I think that have really progressed very well in the
Mhm.
last few years, and quite frankly, they've had to, because those were the majority of the breaches were coming through.
So going back again to job related things, for someone who is, say, feeling stuck in a lower level security job, like at a help desk or some other place where they don't feel like they can break out of, what are some things that they can take on today, whether reading up on a new skill, sign up for a course that could move them in the direction of a career as a security consultant?
Sure, signing up for a new course, getting certified in many of those areas we mentioned earlier
Hmm.
are very helpful, as well as learning how to do security assessments and audits.
Okay.
Board at a help center or a help desk, this will get them out of the office. They'll be on site with clients. That comes
Hmm.
with its own issues, as you can imagine, too. We recently did some on-site assessments for a hospital in Milwaukee a couple of months ago in the middle of the polar vortex. So we had a couple teams out there doing the parking garage and having to walk around the hospital, and they said it's as cold as they've ever been.
Hmm.
But you know what? They weren't stuck in the office, and so it kind of helps them to get their foot in the door when they can do that, because it's really like the first step for all the rest of the security we can do. Is people want to start with an assessment. Can you come in here and do an assessment? And so even if they have their own security team that does assessments, I'm
Hmm.
talking about corporations or sports teams, for example, we'll still get hired by maybe the CEO or by the team owner and say, can you come in here and do a peer review? I want to make sure that I'm getting what I'm supposed to be getting, and they'll ask us to do an independent outside assessment. So it starts with the assessment, and then we can make recommendations based on their budget as to what changes they might need to make.
Okay. You mentioned certifications real briefly. What are the particular certifications that you like to see on a resume, or that indicate that this person has the background that I'm looking for?
Sure, the certified security professional is usually the basic uh, accreditation or certification, and then depending on um, specifically what we're looking for in the computer industry, the computer security incident response team, the CCERT is very good,
Hmm.
as well as the certified information security a system security professional, the CISSP,
Hmm.
and the CCSP, the certified cloud security professional. Those are all pretty much key to resolving a lot of the problems we have. It demonstrates that they've been able to grasp and learn this information in this industry. And of course, that's your basic building blocks, the foundation, if you will, for them to then come in at Guidepost and learn even more from mentors or some of the other professionals we have on the ground already.
So as we wrap things up today, within your area, specifically within cybersecurity, what are some of the security challenges that you see on the horizon for 2019, 2020, and beyond?
Couple of things: the Internet of Things.
Okay.
As I was driving in this morning, there's Wi-Fi in my truck, and there's Wi-Fi in airplanes. There's Wi-Fi in everyone's houses, including controlling your refrigerator, your
Yep.
television, your thermostat, your electricity, and it really comes down to how well protected are you? What kind of password do you set on those things? We saw the incident where someone went on the plane and hacked into the systems of the plane.
Yeah.
To prove that he could do it. He wasn't going to do anything nefarious or bad, but still to show that someone can get on an airplane, get on their Wi-Fi, and then hack the system.
Wow.
That's a huge problem, as you can imagine. So I see that as being a significant challenge in the years coming up, as well as the ransomware. We still continue to see people being subjected to ransomware where their entire system gets locked down and they got to pay a lot of money to get back into it. So
we've had a few guests talk about ransomware. What are your particular strategies in terms of, someone calls you about ransomware? Do you advocate for paying the fee? Do you advocate for trying to unlock it? Do you have sort of a set policy, or does it vary from case to case?
It does vary from case to case. I was actually just going to say that we have to look at the totality of the circumstances and the type of breach, as well as what type of data the client needs to get access to, and how critical is it? Is it a hospital where machines are going to get turned off and people are going to die? So you take a look at the totality of circumstances. I mean, to the extent that you think you might be able to break that, great. But in some instances, time is of the essence, as well as the potential risk for life. And in some instances, we've had to pay it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, again, wrapping up, if people want to know more info about you, John Torres, or Guidepost Security, where can they go online?
Best place is our website, guidepostsolutions.com, or they can follow us on our Guidepost Solutions Twitter and LinkedIn accounts. So those are the easiest ways to get more information.
Okay, and that's at Guidepost Solutions?
Right. Or they can reach out to us, directly through the website, and happy to talk to them.
Great. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening and watching. If you enjoyed today's video, you can find many more on our YouTube page. Just go to YouTube and type in Cyberwork with Infosec to check out our collection of tutorials, interviews, and past webinars. If you'd rather have us in your ears during your workday, all of our videos are also available as audio podcasts. Just search Cyberwork with Infosec in your favorite podcast catcher. To see current promotional offers available for podcast listeners and to learn more about our Infosec Pro live boot camps, Infosec Skills on-demand training library, and Infosec IQ security awareness and training platform, go to infosecinstitute.com/podcast or click the link in the description below. Thanks once again to John Torres, and thank you all for watching and listening. We'll speak to you next week.